In 2014, my family and I decided to move from our old apartment in Brooklyn to the rolling hills of Tennessee. According to my parents, life was a lot more easier there. They had hated the city, and as they both got older, they grew more attached to the outskirts of the countryside. At the time, the cost of plane tickets were at an all-time high, and we didn't have much money to spare. Because of this, my parents had decided that we drive from New York all the way to Tennessee. It was a long drive, but considering the amount of road trips we did over the years, it was definitely possible. Anyway, we had packed everything up and began the 15-hour drive to Gatlinburg, about 4 hours outside of Nashville. It was a long drive, but we were about halfway through, and we weren't about to just give up. If I can remember, we were driving on a road somewhere in Kentucky or West Virginia that stretched across the state. It's around 1 a.m. and I wake up when I start to feel the car slowly coming to a stop. As I awoke, I asked my dad why we had stopped, and that was when I noticed what appeared to be a person laying in the middle of the road. Right then, I knew it was a woman, maybe mid-40s, black hair, and appeared to be wearing a sweater. At this point, my parents are confused and worried when my dad tells us to stay in the car as he begins to get out. With my dad being ex-military, his instinct was to help the person in need or prepare for the worst. My mom and I see my dad approach the woman, still laying face down on the pavement, when he turns her over and immediately steps back. It was a little hard to see, but we can see my dad appear to start panicking and run back to the car where he just drives off. I was only able to take one glance at her as we went by, and what I saw made me understand why my dad was so scared. The only way I could describe her was that her face looked contorted. Her eyes bulging, her jaw misaligned, and her right arm behind her. It was a scene where I didn't think any human was even capable to do this to someone. The only thing my dad saw that could possibly give an explanation as to who did this was a blue star spray painted on the road beside her. We didn't know what it meant or who put it there, but my family believes that it was a symbol to represent a group of killers. I know, crazy theory, right? But can you blame us? It took another 3 hours before we got to the next town where my dad was thankfully able to file a police report. We didn't know the exact location of the murder, other than on a road in the middle of nowhere. I'm not sure if the proper authorities took action or not, but I'd like to think they did and opened an investigation. 2 months later, I was scrolling through Reddit when I came across a post that mainly focused on disappearances and theories. I was into the mystery behind all that type of stuff, so I found it interesting. The post I was looking at had multiple photos and videos of theories and clues as to how or why these people might have disappeared. I ended up landing on one of the photos that had something that looked awfully familiar, and that's when I saw the blue star. The same blue star I had seen on the road that night. This time, someone had taken a picture of one that had been spray painted on the bark of a tree. The title of the post read something along the lines of, "Found this symbol on a hike." The thread was full of replies and comments of theories as to who might have done this. Everything from the smiley face killers all the way to ritualistic sacrifices from a cult. Hell, there was even a comment about how it could be the work of aliens. The thing that everyone could come up with was that they were just another group of killers nicknamed the Star Killers. All these theories were valid, but I wasn't gonna go digging for the most plausible explanation. My family never received an update about the incident, and we aren't expecting one. If anyone has more info on the Star Killers, please inform people about them. Back in 2007, I took a trip up to Ohio to visit a friend that had recently moved away for college. I attended school in my hometown as I didn't have the money to go out of state, nor did I even want to. The friend I had been going to visit was one of my best friends throughout middle and high school. The type of friend who'd always have your back and was someone you could rely on. As the saying goes, all good things must come to an end, and that summer he had moved away. However, seeing as winter break would finally be upon us, I decided to use that time to go and visit him. For context, I live all the way in North Carolina, meaning I'd have to drive a lot. I didn't mind it though, as I love road trips and always found them relaxing as it was time to myself at the end of the day. I'd always stop at attractions in different states and even stop along the roads and take pictures of the valley. Anyway, this happened the evening on the first day I had left. I was driving down I-75 in Kentucky when I happened to notice a sign that showed that there was a rest stop at the next exit. After all, I was pretty hungry and I still had another few hours to go. Keep in mind, I was in a rural area, so there was nothing out here for miles other than a long stretch of road. That being said, I pull off to the side and enter the rest stop, hoping to grab some hot food while I'm there. There were no other cars and only two places off this exit, the rest stop and an older looking gas station. I get out of my car and instantly notice that it appeared to be closed. I checked my watch and it was 3:30 p.m. What kind of gas station closes past noon? I thought to myself. Upon looking inside, however, I could tell that it had been closed for a while. In fact, there was seemingly nothing inside, other than a few shelves moved around and a few broken beer bottles. This confirmed that it was indeed abandoned, which disappointed me. As I was about to get back in my car, I can see someone's head peer out from behind the gas station. They didn't reveal themselves, but I could tell they were watching me, but trying to not be seen. I gave a quick wave, making it known that I had saw them, but they had no reaction to this. As I approach my car, I then see the person step out from behind the building, revealing themselves. It was a man who appeared to be in his 40s or 50s. He was not a pleasant-looking man. While it might have been a little weird, I didn't feel threatened by his presence, as I just assumed he might have been homeless. In a respectful tone, I tell him I was leaving now and that I'd let him be. This seemed to work, as I then saw him go back behind the gas station out of sight. I get back in my car and pull out of the rest stop and back onto the road. About 20 minutes later, I'm still on the road when all of a sudden my car starts making this screeching noise before completely breaking down. Cussing to myself, I pull over and step outside to see what the problem was. What I saw sent chills down my spine. All 4 tires of my car had been slashed. All of them. I then came to the realization that someone had to have done this while I was looking into the gas station. Mind you, my tires were really good ones and could withstand sharp objects, so I knew for a fact that this was no accident. At that point, I obviously called the police, where my car had been towed to a body shop that wasn't too far. I had to pay and wait nearly an hour for the new tires before I was able to get back on the road and finish the drive. Police had said they looked into the rest stop, but whoever did this to my car was long gone. I knew right then that whoever had done this had to be involved with the man I had seen. The rest of my trip went as planned and I was able to see my friend. I've told many people about this story and many have claimed that it was just intoxicated homeless squatters. I have no idea what their intentions were or what would have happened had I stayed longer. Needless to say, however, I'm very glad I got out of there when I did. From now on, I always try to avoid rest stops unless they're open, and I'm always more cautious of my car.
When I was in 8th grade, my dad splurged and bought his dream car. I was much too young at the time to drive, so I don't remember any of the specs. But the gist is, he purchased a convertible BMW Z4. It was silver through and through, with chrome and glass for the accents. It was an absolutely beautiful machine, and had a lot of power underneath that hood. Well, that first year that he bought it, he wanted to go on a road trip with me. A way to celebrate, a way to bond, and a way to break in the new ride. He even said he'd give me some driving instructions. All of it sounded fun, so when school got out that summer, we packed up and hit the road for about a week total. We couldn't fit much more in the way of clothes and supplies in the trunk and the back seat. If you've never seen one, Google it. Z4s are very small cars, but it was fun, and we hit the road with a good idea of where we were going, as my dad and I had been loosely planning our trip for about a month or two. We'd go north at first, then shoot over west before coming down the coastal highway through California. We jammed music, talked about life, told stories from the good old days, typical father-son stuff. We even told riddles and jokes, some of my favorite pastimes. We saw all manner of beautiful terrain, mostly canyons and valleys throughout the Southwest and the Pacific Northwest. It was cool, and I loved every minute of it. Stopping was a treat too. I was a fat kid growing up, so I loved all that gas station delight food, and we got a lot to eat. Chips, jerky, soda, gut bomb burgers, all of it. Other times we would stop at nicer hotels, and this would prompt my dad to seek out nicer restaurants for us to eat at. It was a cool dichotomy, and seemed to satisfy both of us. There was one night that we rolled into some mid-sized town, and I can't remember the name of it. Litchfield or Litchbrook, something like that. This was one of the stops where we got a nice hotel room. We hit the pool, then wandered around downtown a bit. I remember we were both gawking at all the ladies. Literally every single woman that we laid eyes on was prettier than the last. It's like there's something in the water out here, son, I remember my dad saying. You might be hitting the road on your own tomorrow. After a nice dinner and a walkabout, we decided to head back to the hotel room. I could tell something weird was going on right when I saw the place. There was this small crowd, clustered around some cars that were parked funny. My dad didn't seem to bat an eye, didn't say anything about them, so I just kept on cruising too. I didn't want to seem like a big baby or anything, since I guess technically nothing was really going on. But still, it was weird. I remember leaving a lingering eye on that crowd as I closed the door behind me and turned the deadbolt until it locked. We were on the ground floor. Well, the whole hotel was, so it's not like it was super fancy or anything. It also didn't have any kind of great security. It was a standard hotel door, standard double locking system with a deadbolt and chain. A huge viewing window right by the door, curtains pulled closed over it. Pretty typical. We settle in, and I start eating some peanut M&Ms. This was another staple for these road trips, as they were my dad's favorite candy. We were watching reruns of Seinfeld when I heard the first few shouts come from outside. I turned and peeked, but Dad just kept watching TV. The guy seemed unshakable. You think they're just drunk out there or something? I asked. It's none of our business, was all Dad said. I nodded and felt like I learned a valuable life lesson there. By the time it hit 9 p.m., we were both pretty beat, so decided to turn in for the night. The riffraff outside seemed to have settled down, and we wanted to get out of town by 6 or 7 a.m. to stay on schedule, so trying to pass out just made sense. We did our bathroom ritual and then promptly went to bed. I didn't fall asleep though. You see, my dad has this magical ability to be able to fall asleep anywhere, at any time, no matter what's going on. He was snoring loud as hell, and outside I could hear those voices getting louder again. My anxiety was further amplified by the fact that I was alone, or at least the only one awake. It just makes things that much worse when you're the only one privy to what is actually happening. Outside it sounded like your pretty average tailgate party. After listening in for a bit, something changed though. Instead of cheering and vibing, it sounded like voices were getting heated, agitated. I kept checking the clock. Around 10:30, the agitation started, and by 11:30, the guys were full on shouting at each other. I could hear a few people trying to mediate, but whatever was happening was quickly getting out of hand. Out of nowhere, the snoring stopped. My dad popped out of bed. He pulled his shirt on and moved to the window, peeked through the blinds. I had my eyes cracked open so I could see his expression. He kept a perfect poker face, just observing whatever was going on out there. My dad was a former Marine, and honestly, we had all heard rumors at family reunions and our get-togethers that in his youth, he'd beat a man to death during a bar fight, then fled town right after. Lack of evidence kept him from ever going to prison. "What's going on out there, Dad?" I asked. "Just a bunch of drunks," was his retort. Dad had also been sober for a couple of years, had a particular disdain for those that got drunk in public. He was a tight ass, is what I'm saying. And now a bunch of strangers had woken him up dead of the night. Any fear I had quickly dissolved. The voices got louder and louder outside, and my dad didn't really miss a beat. He pulled on a pair of shorts and his shoes and started for the door. "There's a gun underneath my pillow," he said. "Keep an eye out and don't open up the door for anyone." With that, my dad disappeared into the darkness. I hopped out of bed and immediately shouldered up to the window. It had one of those big, heavy curtains draped in front of it, the kind that could pass for a comforter. I peeled back one edge and looked out with a single eye. I had nailed those sounds that I was hearing earlier. It was a little tailgate party in the far parking lot of the hotel. One of the trucks seemed to be for the road company of some kind, like highway maintenance or something. It had cones and stuff in the back, and one big decal on the side. Definitely a work truck. My dad approached these guys from the shadows. He skulked around the side of the building and stuck to hard-to-see places. Only once he was pretty much on top of them did he step out and make his presence known. The crowd flinched at first, then turned and got somewhat silent. I couldn't hear the words, but Dad was moving as he spoke, motioning to the hotel room and then his car. Everyone nodded along, then he said goodnight. Dad always gave off this cop energy, so people usually listened to him. He came back to the room, slipped the key in, and then sat on the bed. "So much for a decent night's sleep," he said, checking his phone. "You should try to get a little more rest. Everything should be good now, son." And I did. I was tired as hell from the drive and sitting up all night. It was well past midnight at this point. My eyes were burning. But with the brief silence and security of my dad, I slipped off into nothingness. I don't know for how long, but what felt like just seconds later, I was shocked awake by a pounding on the door. I remember what my dad said in the moment: "Don't open the door for anyone." But for some reason, I had it in my head that he was still outside. That no time had gone by at all, and I just fallen asleep while he was having his first little conversation with them out there. I hopped up in a panic and rushed for the door, only to feel a heavy hand come down on my shoulder. Startled, I whirled around, and there was my dad sitting on the edge of his bed. "We're all here, we're all good," he assured me. "Just that nonsense outside." He was projecting confidence, but I could tell my dad was a little rattled. Maybe he'd been sleeping too, and now he didn't know what was going on. Whoever was out the door kept banging him and started to holler throughout the walls. "Help me! Please, you gotta let me in!" Beyond that, we could hear voices from earlier, closing in on the room. Dad took his pistol and went to the window, took a peek and didn't like what he saw. The guy caught a glimpse of him through the glass, started banging on the window, begging and pleading for us to open up the door. "Please, man, they're gonna kill me out here, please!" "Why? What'd you do?" my dad shouted through the glass. He turned to me and pointed to his phone. He told me to call 911. Any kind of talk about death was reason to have cops on site. I grabbed his phone, but in my stupid kid confidence, I dialed 911 but didn't hit the call button. I got off the bed and went to my dad's side and looked out. There was a small mob coming up from behind this guy, those people from earlier. I looked at the guy at the door, and I didn't really recognize him. He was dressed different from everyone else. That's when I noticed that logo on his clothing. It was the same as the work truck in the corner of the parking lot. "Dad, I think that's his truck," I said, pointing. "What are you saying?" he asked me. As quickly as I could, I tried to explain what was running through my mind. This guy was just trying to get to his work truck when the drunk people decided to mess with him. I didn't know if I was actually right, but in the moment it kind of made sense to me. My dad pointed to the guy, who was about to start kicking in our door, and hollered out a question. "Is that your truck out there?" "Yes," My dad took a sharp breath through his teeth, unbolted the lock, and swung the door open. He didn't let the guy come inside, just stood right in his way. He brought the pistol up to eye level, and let everyone outside get a good look at it too. The guy still tried to barrel inside the room, but Dad stayed firm in his way. "I just called the police," he shouted over the voices. That seemed to get everyone's attention pretty quickly. That's when I realized I never dialed it. But seeing everyone tuck their tail and start to leave, I figured it was all over. The guy at our door collapsed against the exterior wall and started explaining everything. He was staying a couple of doors down. He'd been out having a few beers when he made the walk back to the hotel. Right away, he noticed the commotion around his truck. That being said that he was in town to finish a job, he didn't want anything happening to his equipment. He said he made a simple request for them to please get away from his vehicle. The crowd had been boozed up at this point, and so was that roadway worker. What started as a question quickly turned into a barking match. The solo guy was severely outgunned. One push led to another. Soon the guy was surrounded. He said he squared up and swung his way out of the circle, but they laid a pretty good beating on him. It was obvious. His room key fell out of his pocket during the scuffle. He just went door to door, begging for help while these people chased him around. Well, at least that was the partial story. The overnight clerk saw some of the incident from his office, and he really did call the cops. They dropped in out of nowhere, just like my dad. His cruisers rolled into the parking lot, even without so much as headlights on, let alone a siren. They corralled anyone who hadn't already fled. Then the real story came out. It turned out the roadway worker had been having some beers at a nearby bar, and so had that entire crowd. Words were exchanged before finally the bartender kicked them all out. As they wandered the streets talking trash, they recognized the guy's truck in the hotel parking lot. They went and bought a case of beer, then literally tailgated on the guy's truck until he showed up, just so they could have that final word. Again, the solo guy started clashing with the group, only to realize there weren't any bouncers to protect him anymore. Next thing he knows, he's banging on a stranger's door, begging for help. When the law showed up, things got real quiet. People scattered, and those who didn't were detained and questioned. Dad and I didn't have to give a statement, and since I wasn't the one who called the police, we just shut the door and got back in bed. The only person that must have got arrested was that roadway worker. His truck was still in the parking lot the next morning when we left.